Hey everyone, welcome back to Business Design, the podcast where we talk about life lessons, learning lessons in entrepreneurship, kind of told from the perspective of a married couple. On our last episode, we kind of got a little bit more deeper into some numbers and some of the nuances and what it actually takes to run a business. And we talked about that idea of going from zero to something. So Lisi, if we were to look, that was a conversation a few weeks ago now, but if we were to look back on that conversation, what were some of the things that kind of stood out to you?
I think what I got out from that whole conversation was that to start a business, to go into business is really a journey of, it's a business journey, but it's also a journey of self-discovery and self-growth, right? That who you are as a person reflects in your business and kind of vice versa. So if you have a certain type of business you want to build, then you will need to kind of, modify and change and add to your personality or characters to go there. I think that was the biggest thing I got. And it's kind of interesting to know that most entrepreneurs kind of go through the same journey, no matter where they are really, right? Some people might be further along, some people must just starting, but it's the same journey really for everyone, but slightly different version.
Yeah, what you just talked about, this idea of a journey, I think that idea kind of hit me square in the eyes over the last week or two. And we just finished up Memorial Day here in the US. There's two things that really hit me like square between the eyes when it comes to this idea of entrepreneurship. And one of them came from a conference that I was at with a bunch of healthcare professionals who were straight up small business entrepreneurs. And then second was a book that I've been reading from like a friend and colleague. His name is Dave Hirsch, this book called Reignition. And it was really interesting. I don't know, I'm a person who I pay attention to signs, I guess. And it was a weird sign, if you would, that I got invited to go speak at this conference of these healthcare entrepreneurs. And at the same time, Dave had just released his book. And when I went to this conference last week, 2 weeks ago, it was basically a conference for healthcare entrepreneurs. So these are folks who are, they have been like nurse practitioners. They've worked in a hospital setting. They may have worked for a physician. But as with most of these businesses in healthcare, it's really tough, right? And most people do it because they love working with patients. They want to save lives. They want to help people. And what happened basically was that a lot of these healthcare entrepreneurs, they got tired of working for somebody else, wanted to start their own practices. And this conference was a conference specifically set up for healthcare entrepreneurs that wanted to either start a business or scale a business. And so I met folks who had achieved that kind of like $1 million in revenue mark, which I think is a big deal for a lot of small businesses to get there. So it was very interesting to see the mindset and the confidence and the sort of like, oh, I got you kind of moments, like with the $1 million revenue folks versus the folks who were literally just starting out their practices.
Interesting. So what were some of your observations that you took away?
For sure, I feel like a lot of the entrepreneurs that are early on in the game, they have this sort of mindset where it's like, I don't want to be too confident in myself because I don't really know what I'm doing. And I think that's actually a really good thing, but it's also a bad thing, right?
Yeah,
because the confidence that you almost have to like believe that you can do more than you can do today in order for you to accomplish what you want. So they're very cautious, right? Which is exactly like I was, right? They don't know what they don't know. And I think it's actually very telling to see the ones that say that and the ones that don't.
Yeah.
Right? They made an investment of about $3,000 or $4,000 to come to this conference to learn about how to scale and start a business. And I think that's a tough trigger for anybody to pull when you have like little to no revenue coming through your business. And that was very similar to me when I first started, was like anything that was like over $30, like I kind of was stressed about making that decision, but ultimately it needed to be an investment. And I think a lot of these people, they realized that they needed to invest ahead of the revenue, right? What was really interesting with this particular group of entrepreneurs is they talked a lot about revenue numbers. They literally going around saying, I made 30,000 this month. I did 50,000 this month. I did 100,000 last month. I did 10,000 this month. I'm trying to get to 80,000. I've never heard any like small business like vertical like speak that openly about like revenue goals they're trying to get to. It's kind of like almost like you don't ask. It's almost like your salary. You almost like don't ask. So I thought it was really interesting to see how they set this bar for themselves in terms of like monthly revenue, right? Which I don't think a lot of people do up front, to be honest, because I think these are people who they don't have time to build a business. They have to start it and start bringing in revenue like right away.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I guess it's my first question was like, what type of healthcare are we in specifically, right? And then second, are these people who are there owners of company who used to be like in healthcare?
Yeah.
Okay, so then
No, they were practitioners in healthcare. They were the staff, if you would, working for like a big company,
right?
Basically.
So it's interesting. Like, why is it the sales goal is such a big deal in that industry?
I don't know.
I almost want to assume that it's not an individual thing. Actually, it's an industry thing. I guess it's a coincidence. We just watched a movie last night about pharmaceutical companies and how the sales system works, and they very much talk openly about how much commission you're getting from one prescription or so to speak. So I'm wondering if it's a industry thing.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. And actually, now you know what? Now that you actually just said that, the way they talk about like Botox units and I got to buy this much up front, I can sell it for this much. It's very, it actually reminds me a lot of sales. You're right.
It is sales. It's 100% sales.
Yeah. And you know what? That's fascinating because part of my job with this cohort of our clients is I actually have to give them marketing education on a monthly basis. And it's actually, when I started presenting, I would always break it down into marketing, sales, and customer success because I think those are the three components of growth, and we mix those together a lot of times. But they don't know marketing, actually. They don't understand marketing. Marketing is all about just getting people to hear about you or find out about who you are if they don't know who you are.
Yeah, maybe it's a good time, like maybe you should explain from a professional point of view what is the difference between marketing and sales.
Yeah.
I think it's obvious to a lot of people, but I'm sure there are some things that maybe not so obvious.
So I say this, you can generate revenue with sales, but no marketing, right?
Correct.
I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's doable. It's very doable to generate revenue from sales without marketing.
Correct.
It's very, 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 very difficult to generate, especially today in today's world, to generate revenue from just pure marketing.
Right.
Marketing's job is to create awareness. It's to create consideration of your brand from that awareness. So they're now like, oh, Costco now provides this service. Now I'm going to consider Costco to go to their pharmacy instead of CVS to go to their pharmacy.
Right.
Right. So that's marketing's job. It's just to tell you, hey, we do this.
Right.
We exist.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean revenue. Now somebody could buy something from you from just that one message that marketing put out. But it's very unlikely in today's day and age because you're so inundated with marketing, right? But it's sales' job to take that consideration and awareness and convert it to revenue. Sometimes you can do that without a salesperson through an email campaign or a retargeting campaign or marketing, but that's like sales conversion driven marketing, right? It's very different from the brand marketing that a lot of us are aware of.
Yeah.
Right?
So I guess if I get it right, if you do marketing right, your customer should come to you without you do like, too much.
If you did it right, I think so.
I mean, we're talking about doing the right way, right?
Yeah.
And the sales is in a case where you had to go to the customer to tell them about it. So in the healthcare conference, they have achieved sales already because they obviously seems to have revenue.
Yep.
So now they're probably thinking about, how to grab customers that will come to them.
So actually the talk track I gave at this conference was on the idea of transitioning from a referral-based mindset to a marketing mindset.
Yeah, which we talked about a couple episodes ago, that a business without marketing, there's only, there's a plateau, there's a cap that you will grow in terms of revenue and company size, right? So once you get into marketing, then you don't know. The upside is...
Yeah, and actually that's, I think that actually segues really nicely into what we're going to talk about today.
Today we're talking about like from 5,000 to 100,000.
Yeah, 500,
right?
5K to 100K in revenue.
Which is really, you're just starting. And it seems
it's from that something to that first 100K.
Yeah,
right?
and it seems like the people you met at the conference there's a lot of it in this section, right?
Totally, yeah. And the thing is that most of them grow by referral. Most of the small businesses that I meet, and that they got started up, they got some level of success, and our agency is a very good example of that, was because we had a really good network. We did good work. We got referred by word of mouth. Inevitably, though, like you will always hit a growth limit to referrals, right? And the talk track I gave was all about this idea of like, yes, referrals are the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow when it comes to like marketing and growth, because they usually send you the most qualified leads. There's like zero acquisition cost to it, right? And like, yeah, it's just free marketing basically, right? And sales. So, but what happens usually is you hit a limit to those referrals. And then you're like, I want to grow more. I want more money. I want this. But then you're like, wait, how do I get more referrals? Right? Because most of those referrals were based on customers. So then you start to get desperate and you're like asking your customers for more referrals. And that just is a weird like place to be in, because you want your customers to volunteer the referrals, right? Right. And then on the flip side, you then start saying like, okay, if I don't want to ask my customers for referrals, I need to start doing marketing. So I start running ads. I start doing social media posts. I pay an agency, but I haven't created any awareness to date. And so now there's people who I was trying to reach who don't know who my brand is, and now I need to spend more money to try to reach those folks, right? And when you do that, and you've never done that before, you almost want to expect the revenue to come from like a referral right away, but it doesn't happen because marketing is a process that you have to invest in.
Yeah.
And the main talk track idea was you have to invest in it ahead of time to get the revenue, right?
So do you think for entrepreneurs who are in this segment of between 5,000 to 100,000, they might still have not tapped the referral network yet because it's so small, right? But this should be the time they start thinking about marketing.
Yeah, I think they have tapped their referral network, which is why they've gone from zero to something, and maybe something to that first 100K. Because and frankly, when I tell people, if you're just getting your thing off the ground, don't start marketing first.
Right.
Like, go find a warm audience.
Right.
Like, talk to your mom, talk to your dad, talk to your cousin, talk to your aunt, talk to your old boss, talk to your old client. Use sales, right, to get off the ground. And I think most of them have done that. But now they're like, okay, I did that, but I'm like 75K of your revenue, where when I was working at the hospital, I was making 150K. So what the hell do I do now? And then inevitably the conversation gets to marketing, and they're like, well, how many ads do I need to run to get a customer? And I'm like, well, you got to test it. And they're like, well, how much does it cost to test? And it just turns into this like cascading amount of questions that make them realize that, oh, in order for me to start making this climb, getting net new customers, not just referral customers, I need to make some kind of investment today, right?
And I think it was, maybe before 10, 20 years ago, there's like, that one doctor in your area or two, right? But now there are just so many of everything, and you can find things on the internet so much easier that it's probably not as easy to get referral business than before.
Right. And it's never been easier to start a business. Let's remember that. You're not only competing against brands like Toby Agency or XYZ brand, but you're also competing in the healthcare space against solopreneurs, people that have no brand. So that's like a whole other group of competition.
Yeah.
Right. And so inevitably, if you're going to want to grow, you're going to have to make that investment. And I think go ahead.
Well, I mean, let's, bring it back to your experience with Toby, right? Like it's kind of been the joke that we never done marketing. Until like recently, really, right?
Yep.
So without doing marketing, you can still go somewhere. But I guess now looking back, if you're back in that period, what would you have done differently?
Yeah. I think there's 2 or 3 things at play here. One is people, right? Something I would have done differently on that march from like 5K to 100K would be people. Second would be like focus and like our product or service and like who it's for. And I think those are like, if I maybe double click on those 2 things. So the people part of it, I did not have my approach to hiring and trying to build the company at the time was to try to find people who had a lot of potential, who are generalists, and to bring them in so that we could do a lot of different things and test a lot of different things, build new services, try more innovative ways to manage our clients and interact with our clients, right? And looking back on that, like that was a big distraction. It took us away from like our core business because we had remember that 0 to something march, one of the big bets we made was on HubSpot. And by betting on HubSpot, it actually forced us to focus on an ecosystem, right? And so I brought in people who had creative backgrounds. I brought in people who actually didn't have any HubSpot background. We had nobody on our team that had a HubSpot background. It was me self-teaching myself, and then a lot of our agency employees teaching themselves HubSpots to become experts. And because we didn't bring in those like early experts who knew more than us in the beginning, because we were too afraid that they would cost too much money or that we didn't have the business to support like these higher salary, more specialized people, it ended up being that we just became a very big generalist kind of agency in the HubSpot world, where other people focused on business models or verticals or,
the hiring experts cost money, right? If your company is not in that position to hire, then it's not really an option you could have, So it's like...
that's the chicken or the egg thing.
Exactly. It's
right?
the chicken and the egg.
Do I go in debt?
Exactly.
I didn't go in debt, right?
You go take out a loan and do this and then have to worry about paying off the loan. But at the same time, your company could be growing much faster and better. So that I guess we don't really know what the end result could have been.
I think if it's your first time doing it, and now we're actually talking about it like this, I think the advice that I have for people is if it's your first time building a company, building a product, actually even building a product is different because a lot of people have built products before, but not necessarily a company. But if you're building a company and you're doing it for the first time, it's probably not a good idea to go out and make those like really large outsized bets. Hiring your first 6-figure person, because most likely the hypothesis that you have on why you need to hire that person or make that large outside bet as a first-time person is going to be wrong.
Yeah. So how many of those healthcare at the conference, I'm guessing healthcare, they're like solopreneurs, or was it?
There's a lot of solopreneurs, but there's certainly ones that have like multi-location brick and mortar, like stores.
So they have an operation, right?
Yeah.
And it's, I guess in that environment, hiring is slightly different than hiring for a service kind of business. I guess it is a service.
You're looking for clinical type folks who can do things like administer Botox or help fill out patient charts and things like that. It's just a different type of resource. Yeah.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I guess that model has a different, that business has a different model than like this business. For example.
There's a little more overhead, I think, that comes along, insurance requirements, right?
Which will also make me think that's why they're so gung-ho about the sales number, because they do have all these bills.
Yeah,
to pay,
you're right. And in fact, that's another thing to consider is like when you're starting a business, what's the amount of capital that you've got to outlay? I did not need to outlay. I only spent as I went,
right?
In a lot of ways. There's some things that I had to, pay 10 grand here or 15 grand there to get this license or start this thing up or invest in a technology platform. But those are not like I don't need to make 6-figure investments or things like that. Whereas with this group, like, yeah, you actually have some cost of goods. You've got Botox units you've got to buy. You've got IV drip bags. You've got, syringes and like all of these supplies that are needed in a service business. So it is challenging. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And also, I would assume that if you're in the 5,000 to 100,000 stage, you're still pretty much working by yourself.
Oh, yeah.
You're the one-man show for everything, right? So at which point do you think someone or some company in that situation starts to think about hiring or getting a team?
Yeah. So in our situation, I had a partner who could roll up the sleeves and do the work too. So it wasn't just a partner that was like a silent partner. It was like an operating partner. And Jared, who we started the company with, he's no longer with the company. And there's a lot of reasons why people split up, but it was just he had personal things that he had to take care of that were just a priority for him with his family. He had to move and do all these things. But regardless, he actually could contribute a lot of skills that allowed us to generate revenue from those skills, just like I had skills in Facebook ads and copywriting. So it was just the two of us to get from zero to something, right? And then I remembered we hired our first intern, and it was just like a guy who, had done some marketing work before. He had was a little bit of a creator and started his own social and brand, and really smart guy, smart kid. Hired him to work with us, and he started to be able to take on some of the like copywriting work that I was doing and some of the HubSpot work that I was doing, so that I could start to because at that point. I was pitching a lot more, and I was like pitching and doing the work. And that allowed me to free up a little bit more time to like respond to proposals and be thinking about new things for us to work on. And then I think, so it was we didn't really hire our first W-2 person. I don't think it was until after 100K in revenue.
Which I think will make sense.
Yeah.
Because if you're making 100K, it's really not that big.
So it was just the two of us, but it wasn't 100K. 5 to 100K was not enough for two people, right? Like, I was still like not making enough income to provide for our family,
right?
Because you were still working a full-time, like a good corporate job, so it was a little bit easier for me to be able to do that, right?
Right.
But yeah, like we were still starving.
Yeah.
For sure then.
Yeah. So I think that the hardest part, I guess I'm kind of in that stage right now too, is to really have time to do all the things that you need to do. And I think because you are one person who has to do anything, like some things inevitably gets left behind, so to speak. There's priorities, right? If sales is the most important, then I'll imagine like branding or marketing are the things that you forget.
Yeah.
And so at the, people come to you for marketing advice in that situation. And it just really sounds like either they had to invest ahead of time to spend the money so that maybe 2 years from now, they will have a way bigger business, or just don't do it and stick with sales.
Yeah, right. And there's nothing wrong with taking a while to get your first like pot of revenue. I think and the reason I think we're talking about like actual numbers from like 0 to something, $5,000 to like 100K, because nobody talks about this. Like there was a time when Uber got its first dollar, right? Like why don't we ever talk about those stories about how they got their first dollar in revenue? Like, what did they do?
It's never that interesting.
It's not that interesting.
It's always like
it's just the person slogging through. Like, okay, I do that.
How many stories you hear in media and personally? Like, the person I've gone through 100 no's to get lucky to that one yes, and that yes made all the difference, right? So I'm guessing for most people, in the beginning, that's the case. Even like big tech companies, how many investor goes to say no until that one investor take a chance on you, right? Yeah. So, in the beginning, it's not that fun. It's just a lot of rejections.
It is. But I think the thing that kept me motivated through a lot of no's, or I'll get back to you, or that's cool, that's nice, you know, I learned a bunch of things.
Yeah.
Every interaction I had was like, I kind of tripped up, like trying to explain this, or clearly they didn't buy my BS when I tried to sell them this, you know? And so you learn through those things, and it's like, I never felt like rejected. And also that's
because if you did, you wouldn't be here today doing this.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty lonely. I was talking to Jeremy, my brother, the other day, and he came here to visit us to workshop some stuff. And I was sort of telling him, like, it's actually really helpful to have you here because it's like such a lonely place to be in when you're in your own head about what's working and what you need to build and what you don't need to build. That you sometimes when you just have someone who kind of understands like what you're trying to do, and it's just a relief that someone gets it, you know? And I think when you're in that, I've got some success. I have a bank account with some money in it. I don't know when the next bunch of money is going to come in. But I think a lot of times when you think about that, it's like you look back on that time and it's like, oh, that was all part of the journey. But when you're in it, it's like, dude, when is this going to be over? Right. And I think that's a lot of the anxiety, honestly, that I felt at that conference that I was at was like, I know I've got to put in the legwork. I've got to make the investments, but when am I going to get the return from it? And even when I go into their Facebook group, I meet folks who are even like way early on. They're barely at 5K a month, you know, and it just like the level of, I guess, angst and despair, you can feel it for sure.
I mean, we kind of talked about in the very beginning of this podcast, like that expectation we put on ourselves when we start something, especially if you know you are successful in your previous career job, doing whatever, right? So I think maybe a lot of that comes from that expectation of, you know, where you should make to make this endeavor worthwhile, right? And I'm sure a lot of them do have bills to pay. So it's like the anxiety of survival, which I totally understand.
Yeah. And you actually know a very practical thing that I heard a lot of folks doing. And I think, again, this is very characteristic for a business that's getting started or a solopreneur that's getting in this like 5 to 100K range. It's kind of a side gig at that point in a lot of ways.
100%.
I would have loved, because it was a side gig for me, frankly, because I was working like an accounting job. I was like literally working.
I would argue that was your side gig.
Fair. Okay. Sure. I had to work, I think it was like 20 hours a week. I was like doing bookkeeping for like a friend's company that he was like the director of finance. And it was like, there's a little bit of an ego thing because I had to like take it at like basically an administrative job to like make some money on the side, you know?
Right.
But while I was starting the company, I had to do that. And I remember, 3 days a week, I would drive down to Norwalk and in California, Southern California, and set up at my little, like, it was literally like a desk in the corner that everyone like threw all their like dead paperwork on, and I would have to unpile it every time. But I never was mad at it though. And I just realized that it was part of the journey. And I think a lot of us, and when I was at this conference, I met a lot of entrepreneurs who are like, oh yeah, I'm still working at the hospital or I'm still working for the physician, but I'm at like 40, I'm like 10K a month. I was like, holy crap, that's a lot of extra money. He's like, yeah, but a lot of it's going back out because I have to, spend 5K on these Botox units and, there's cost of goods related to them, right? There's insurance that they have to now have and LLC fees and all those things. So I think it's another characteristic of this sort of like 5K to 100K march is like, hey, there's a lot more people like working side gigs as they're building revenue at their company. And a lot of people do that. And I feel like it's another part of this march that a lot of us don't like talk about.
Yeah. The other thing that I find myself sometimes think about, and I feel like it's probably something we talk about enough, is that the kind of thinking sometimes you have when you go through like a rough patch or like a shitty interaction, you start thinking, oh, like if XYZ was better, it's different, then this will be so much easier. I can do this better. Yeah. Right. And then I think between the 5,000 to 100K, it's a lot that mindset is probably the most.
In a lot of ways, if you have
Common.
zero and you had zero for months, it's like, all right, like it's a little easier
Right.
to have the conversation of like, or a significant other to be like, look, dude, you've been at this for 6 months and you spent this much and you got nothing.
Right.
Like that's a legit conversation to have
Right.
with someone.
But at that point, you really don't know anything. So I think everything seems like a challenge, right? But I think
Yeah.
when you have some money, and especially if you're close to $100,000, then you're like, oh, you wish some conditions are different, or like, if I had more time, or you had more money, if I did
Yeah.
X and Y, Z, and then I think I start to realize like all this is part of the journey.
Yeah.
What you have and what you got is what you have.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to like the first couple of episodes where we talked about your risk tolerance and your situation in life. If you've got like a wife so if you're like, I feel like if you're married or have like in a deep relationship with someone, like it's a little bit easier to try these things than to like take a little bit more outsized risk where there might be like a longer path to some revenue or profitability. And then if you tend to be younger and not have a significant other, you can pretty much do whatever the fuck you want to do, right? Waste all the time you want, right? And then when you're like married, have a significant other, and then you have kids, that's like a whole other, like be realistic with your time and your ability. And then you have to layer in the other piece of it, which is your financial situation, right? Your risk tolerance, the risk tolerance of the unit
family
you're in. And so all of these are very different permutations and outcomes for everybody. But in our situation specifically, it was easier for me to do things that did not require us to get revenue up front. But I still had the mindset of getting revenue up front, right? And again, there's some entrepreneurs that just want to do that. And I now, in hindsight, as a more experienced entrepreneur, I don't want to do that anymore. I actually would rather build more runway. I would rather be a little slower to start now that I have some experience and to be more methodical. But I'm in a different place now. I'm a little bit more stable. I have a lot more knowledge.
Yeah.
I have, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm in a much different place now than I was then, but I would do things completely differently. Right?
Yeah.
So again, like it's really hard to give advice on these types of things. I think you can just sort of highlight different scenarios that people are in. And again, if you're in that 5 to 100K march and you do have more runway, don't worry about getting into 500K from that 100K all of a sudden, right? Be a little more methodical, slow down because you have the opportunity to slow down.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, then when do you think they should start thinking about if the people who are having a business as a side hustle, right? When do they should start thinking about take the plunge?
Product market fit. When you get product market fit or you are like on the path to it, I think that's usually a good sign that it's ready to like, you can bet your life on it a little bit, you know, but until you get product market fit, and that's actually, it took me 3 or 4 months to launch a product. I haven't even launched it yet, but because I know I don't have product market fit. Before, the old me would have just put it out there and probably got mediocre results. I would have gotten some revenue and that's happened to us.
Yeah.
In fact, we've generated a few $100,000 of revenue on a product or service that we launched that didn't go through the typical product market fit process. But guess what? After I hit 300,000, 400,000 in revenue from that product, it was just like impossible to get more, right? Because it just didn't define the product well enough.
Right. Interesting. So it's not really about the dollar amount for like solopreneur, entrepreneur, right? Like a dollar amount might not be a accurate reflection of this, like the health of your business, so to speak, right? Your company could make a lot of money, but still still trying to figure things out.
It could be dead tomorrow because you didn't build a sustainable way to grow revenue from that. It could be dead tomorrow. You could be successful today and dead tomorrow. And in fact, I was shocked when I think I mentioned this stat in maybe our last pod, but I was shocked to see that the 10-year failure rate for small to medium-sized businesses, so after 10 years, a business has been alive, 70% of them fail. Right? Like, that's kind of crazy. Yeah. And if you were successful as a new business in the last 5 years and you just started, don't use that success as a barometer for the next 5 years, because there's a very good chance a lot of times they get overconfident and they have a little more money. So they start, and I've done this before on part of the marches where I'm like, oh, we got some cash flow. Yeah. Let's just go start. And you're a lot like less methodical about how you spend it. You're less careful. And then you start wasting it. I see it all the time.
Yeah,
I call it the mail machine expense. So when I was acquiring companies back in the day, we would always go through their books. And when companies were doing really well, they would do things like they would spend money on a Pitney Bowes like automated stamp machine that cost an extra like 3 cents per send, but it was really convenient for everybody to send hundreds of pieces of mail. Whereas before, you get a rubber a sponge and you just do it and just stamp them, right? So this company during good times was spending like, I want to say like an extra $100,000 a month, right? And at the time when you're making 30 million in revenue a month, that 100K doesn't seem like anything. But when you're making $1 million a month in revenue, that 100K a month starts to seem like a lot, right? That machine was completely unnecessary. But it was the mindset of the owner to be like, oh, I got this extra money. Let me go buy this machine, without really understanding that it wasn't a good investment.
Right.
And so again, the number doesn't really matter. It's where you are in the life cycle and mindset of your business. If you are a longer runway business, then the march from 5K to 100K doesn't really matter, right? But if you're in a business where, look, my goal is to get to 200K in revenue as a solopreneur, and it's make it or break it to eat, like that 5K to 100K march, you're not going to think long term. You're going to think short term, and that's okay, because you got to eat, right? And so I guess the point I'm making here is that as we talk about each of these marches, you got to understand the context of your personal and your lifestyle situation, right? Because a lot of these entrepreneur advice, they'll give you this generic advice, which definitely applies to some, but not to all of us, right?
Well, I also think that 10 years, if somebody's working on a company project for 10 years, if they didn't delegate and hire a team, they're probably burned out by then.
Yeah. I mean,
if you're doing it by yourself, if you're like, a nurse doing Botox for 10 years after that.
Like, never hire an assistant.
Yeah. I think human minds have, we have that 7-year itch, like every 7 years you want to do something different, right? Yep. So if whatever you're doing is something you're truly passionate about and something you want to do for life, then you kind of just keep going. You slow down, speed up as you go. It's part of the journey, right? But if somebody was a specific expectation, I must make, $200,000 a year to be happy, then I can see after 10 years of doing it.
Well, then this is not the thing for you. If you know that's your number, just go get a W-2 job and take, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not the right thing for you.
You should be, maybe the thinking is 200,000 or more.
Right.
The more is the carrot that most people want to capture. Right?
Yeah, that's right. And actually part of the big thing at this conference, and again, this is very important as you're building a 5 when you're in that sort of initial march to 100K. It depends on what you want to do at the end of the business. And so what happens is, if you make deliberate investments in your business in this, and it can be 5 to 100, 100 to 500, 500 to 1 million, whatever. But if you want to sell your business in the future, what a private equity, family offices, investors are looking for is they want to make sure that you've invested in systems and processes, not the business. If the business runs on you, they're never going to buy your business.
Correct. Right. And I think that's a trap that a lot of entrepreneurs fall into.
And then they want to sell, and then they realize, oh shit, I just built this whole thing around myself. Nobody wants to talk to me. Or they want to give me like a 1.5x valuation on my business instead of a 5x or a 4x valuation.
Right.
You know?
Right. So I think that's really interesting. I think it's like if you decide to get into business, you're probably pretty driven to start, right? And the natural instinct is to, I can do everything. I'm gonna do everything.
I have to do everything.
I have to do everything.
I can't afford it. Yeah.
Right. Right. Exactly. And you kind of could go on that routine or habit and just that's just like that's how you operate after a little while.
It's a habit I'm trying to break with our more senior team members right now because I've built a bad I think I built a bad sort of culture where we've been very entrepreneurial and we're really good at being very entrepreneurial. But now when we're in this like midlife cycle of our business, when we're on our march to like that sort of 10 million in revenue, like look, all those things and that culture that I built are liabilities now.
Like, can you give us some examples?
One would be a lot of my team wants to save me money.
Right.
Let's go hire this person.
Right.
Or let's go use this software. It's cheaper.
Right.
But we have to do this workaround, or that person that we hired doesn't have the skill set.
Right.
And then I get pissed off because I'm like, guys, like you saved me like a few $100 a month or like maybe $1,000 a month on a salary, but the software sucks.
Right.
And this person sucks. Right. So, it's hard to break that mentality because, and again, I get it. You're trying to be a steward of the company. That's very important. But that's not what we need right now. We're not in that phase anymore. And it's hard to break that mentality sometimes. You know?
Gotcha. So it's like when you're in the 5,000 to 100K, you really are in the mindset of how to be smart,
crafty,
play for the long.
Oh yeah, I think it's a street smarts versus it's like street smarts versus MBA smarts at that
point. Yeah. Maybe next episode we can talk about the MBA smarts because then when the company gets bigger, you got to have more system. And building the system, all that has methodologies, right? Like I think since you starting the business and we've been working together, the realization we had that there's a playbook out there for pretty much everything, right? If you do it, put effort into it and do it the proper way, then you will work.
There is a formula to it. I believe there's a formula to it. I didn't believe it in the beginning. I think everyone could just build their own way.
Yeah.
And there's certainly people who do it their own way. That's the 20%. But the 80% who you see of a scaling business is cash flowing, it can be sold. They're following a process.
Yeah.
And it's the reason why I connect with a lot of entrepreneurs is because I am a cross between the street smart, like go hustle, get it done, and that's a byproduct of me being a promoter and a DJ, to be honest with you, back in the day. But then I'm also the MBA guy, right? Like I could sit with a board, I could talk through strategy, I can talk through frameworks and things like that. And I think as I meet these entrepreneurs, they have this right blend between hustling, rolling up the sleeves, but also being the suit and tie, like corporate guy who can stand up in front of a bunch of, suit and tie type of investors and speak intelligently.
Right.
That I think has really served me well. And now I'm starting to realize the benefits of that as our company is starting to grow and scale because I've seen this before. I know I've seen businesses that have experienced these pains and it's nothing unusual. I guess.
Do you still remember the cash flow situation during that time? I would imagine
we were breaking even cash flow wise. But that's because I think I was distributing out maybe 3,000 a month to myself and Jared at the time. And then the rest of it we're paying we had some contractors on board. So it was HubSpot was $1,500 a month. Me and Jared was $3K a month each. So that was $7,500 a month. And there was $3,500 a month left over for contractors to do the work. And there was no money left over after that.
So it sounds like if the cash flow was a lot simpler at that point.
Well, now I'm moving towards
there's 5 numbers you're working with.
Yes. Our P&L was a lot simpler back then, and I didn't have to do as much back of the envelope calculations to figure things out. But as we got bigger, we started using QuickBooks and integrated all those systems. And so those things grow as you grow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess the big thing really is for the entrepreneurs who are in 5,000, 100K time is to, I think to me, it's like, do you want to grow beyond that? Because that's the question too,
One of the big questions that I think a lot of people, mentors ask people is like, are you trying to start a lifestyle business, build a unicorn?
Like, how much do you want to make? How much will make you happy in a year, right?
I don't think anybody really knows when these first start. So really think through that. I said I wanted to build a real business, but I ended up building kind of a lifestyle business. But so, now we're transitioning into like a real business.
Yeah, but I think that's probably the most cases for people, right? Yeah. They have a passion. You should go into business that you at least have passion about, instead of just randomly something that will make money, because then you wouldn't really to do it for long.
Yeah, and that's a lifestyle.
You won't be able to do it for long. So you got to pick the right thing to go into and then decide like what's the outcome you want to have. Do you want to have, the freedom of running a business, but you probably got to be working a lot more? But having that freedom and do whatever you want is awesome. Or like, is that number is what you care about? And then in that case, what Andrew said earlier is that you should just go find a good job that pays you that.
Yeah, and that ties into this whole thing is that depending on what that decision is, and it's actually, that decision is going to change all the time, but depending on what that decision is, that is going to dictate how you approach that 5K to 100K march.
Right.
Some people, that's not even a march. They don't even give a shit about what happens then. Some people, that's everything.
Right. Yeah.
And for me, it was everything for me because it was validation. People were willing to give me money for a service that I basically never provided before in the form that I provided it in.
Yeah. I'm also curious, like for companies who make 200,000, is it pretty easy to make it to 500?
Depends on what you did on that march. And actually, that's a good topic for our next episode, which is we're going to talk about this next march to the 500K in revenue. And I think some of the things that I considered and thought about, and I feel like this was where I made the most mistakes. I had the most, oh shit, we screwed up and we made bad bets. I made a lot of bad bets on that march, actually. And then a pandemic happened and, so there's a lot to talk about on the next episode for sure.
But also, I don't think it's possible for anybody to make that march without making mistakes. So it just matters if is the mistake going to take you down for good or something that you can recover.
Yeah.
So
we'll talk about that on the next episode. Thanks for tuning in. I'm hoping that these conversations are actually somewhat realistic and relevant to those of you who are in the thick of starting a business or actually just thinking about starting it. So let us know if you have any comments. Be sure to like and subscribe and the Business Design Podcast. And of course, we're going to cut all this up and put it back out in sort of shorter formats. But thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.